Hello everyone! Even though HOYOVerse still hasn't dropped any drip marketing on her, Citlali will be one of the new 5-star characters releasing alongside Mawika in patch 5.3, and we already have the details of her initial beta kit. Citlali is a Cryo character, and the Cryo element is in a pretty bad state in the meta right now in terms of reactions, teams, and characters. HOYOVerse themselves haven't even reran any Cryo limited 5 stars in ages, so is Citlali the new Cryo buff that everyone has been waiting for? Well, currently she doesn't really buff Cryo, but she buffs other characters instead, so let's get right into the details of her initial beta kit. As always, remember that this is very early information, so very subject to change. Citlali is a 5-star Cryo catalyst that ascends with Elemental Mastery. Key thing to note for base stats is that Citlali has 127 base attack, the second lowest in the game. She is an off-field AoE Cryo applicator that is able to deal some considerable damage and provide a shield to the team. All of this scales off of Elemental Mastery. In addition, she is currently designed to be played in teams that can trigger Freeze or Melt. The core of Citlali's kit is in her Elemental skill. Using it deals AoE damage and creates a Cryo shield. Assuming Citlali is full EM main stats to maximize shield strength, Citlali gives an about 10,000 HP shield at talent level 10. This shield lasts for 20 seconds and her skill cooldown is only 16 seconds, so full uptime. However, 10,000 HP is a somewhat weak shield. If I compare this with a shield created with a C2 plus Diona with triple HP artifacts at around 30k HP, Citlali's shield is very similar to Diona's, whose shield is weaker than characters like Layla and Zhongli. So with her current numbers, don't expect Citlali to be a massive shield support, but a buffer who has a small shield and some damage as well. Citlali's off-field Cryo application comes from the main part of her skill where she summons its Papa, who is an angry little pillow, and makes Citlali enter Night Soul's Blessing with 24 Night Soul points. Its Papa follows the character around but only activates when Citlali has at least 50 Night Soul points. Once this happens, its Papa creates a Frost Storm, which is a large field that follows the active character and deals Cryo damage to all enemies within the field, attacking once every second. This is Citlali's source of off-field AoE Cryo application, and it has a elemental ICD of every other hit. This field consumes 8 Night Soul points every second and will disappear once Citlali runs out of points. But aside from Citlali's skill, how does she gain more Night Soul points to activate her off-field Cryo application? Well, her elemental burst is another source of these points. Using it gives Citlali 24 Night Soul points and attacks enemies with a nuke of AoE damage. In addition, up to 3 additional skulls can spawn near 3 enemies, dealing additional damage and giving Citlali another 3 Night Soul points for each skull. So in single target, Citlali's burst gives 27 Night Soul points. With skill and burst, Citlali can activate her off-field AoE Cryo app from her skill. However, Citlali's passives also contribute a lot of Night Soul points to extend this duration. With her A1, while Citlali is in Night Soul's Blessing, when the party triggers either Freeze or Melt, that enemy's Pyro and Hydro resistance gets decreased by 20% for 12 seconds. In addition, triggering this passive gives 16 Night Soul points. This Night Soul point restoration has a cooldown of 8 seconds. Assuming you trigger this twice within a rotation, Citlali's A1 gives her 32 total Night Soul points. This passive is why Citlali will be played in teams that trigger Freeze or Melt, as not only are the Night Soul points important, but the Hydro and Pyro Restra is an important buff that can be given to a team. In addition, with Citlali's A4, every time Night Soul burst is triggered, she gains 4 Night Soul points. Her A4 also increases the damage of both her skill and burst based on Citlali's Elemental Mastery. Most notably, her burst gets an additional 2400% EM multiplier, greatly amplifying its nuking capabilities. Thus, if we add up all the available Night Soul points she can gain within the rotation, we get a total of 91 Night Soul points, and since its Papa's Cryo field consumes 8 per second, we get Citlali's final duration of her off-field AoE Cryo application to be about 11 seconds. Remember that the Cryo field attacks enemies every second and every other hit applies Cryo. Thus, every rotation should give 11 instances of damage with 6 instances of Cryo application. Lastly, Citlali's exploration passives are very similar to Aurora's, allowing her to do a super jump, glide around, and aim at entities while in the air. In addition, triggering Night Soul Burst restores 20 Phlogiston in the overworld. That's everything on Citlali's base kit. In terms of talent priority, prioritize her burst as it will be a potential source of massive nuke damage. Then you can level her skill to slightly increase the strength of her shield along with her off-field damage. Citlali's mechanics in terms of Night Soul points and how it affects her off-field Cryo application can get complicated, but in practice, all you need to do to play Citlali is skill, then burst, then swap out to your other characters. Using burst first, then skill also works. Just make sure your team is built around triggering Freeze or Melts for Citlali. Next, let's cover Citlali's beta constellations. C1 basically allows Citlali to give the team 16 total Shenhe-like quills after using her elemental skill that scale off her elemental mastery. Nice additional damage. C2 allows Citlali to shield other teammates as well, useful for multiplayer. In addition, it gives Citlali herself 125 elemental mastery, as well as any character who is shielded by Citlali's shield 250 elemental mastery. On top of that, she gives an additional 20% pyro and hydro red shred against enemies that were frozen or melted. An overall very strong buffing constellation. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, C4 gives Citlali an additional hard-hitting attack that restores 16 Night Soul points and scales with her elemental mastery, which occurs when enemies are hit by its Papa's Froststorm. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 allows Citlali's off-field cryo app to continue existing even when she doesn't have any remaining Night Soul points. In addition, while her skill is active, Citlali can press skill again to consume all of her Night Soul points, and depending on how much she consumes, she gives up to 60% pyro, hydro, and cryo damage bonus to the team. Next, let's go over Citlali's potential build options. For weapons, her signature gives a total of 365 EM. In addition, after the wearer creates a shield, the team gets 28% damage bonus. Very strong weapon for EM and has supportive capabilities, obviously her best choice. The only other 5-star weapon you can really use is Nahida's signature, as it has an EM substat and shares some EM to the team. For 4-star weapons, Wandering Evenstar is a great option with its EM substat and team attack buff from its special passive. You can also use Fruit of Fulfillment, the free-to-play Sumeru craftable. The ER substat is great to meet Citlali's ER requirements, and the special passive also gives extra EM, all good stats for Citlali. Lastly, you can also consider using Sacrificial Fragments or Favonius Codex. For artifact sets, 4-piece scroll is the most obvious choice, as Citlali is an off-field natlan support. The 4-piece team damage bonus is just so strong. In most of her best teams, she will stick to this one set, but if you do happen to need to swap since you have a scroll user already, you can consider Tenacity at the Melodith for support or Gilded Dreams for more EM. For artifact stats, ER or EM Hourglass depending on your weapon choice and energy needs, EM Goblet, and either Crit or EM Circlet depending on substats. Since currently Citlali's shield is on the weaker side even with a full EM build, I think it would generally be better to focus more on optimizing her potential nuke damage and ER to burst every rotation. But of course, getting EM also increases her damage on top of her shield, so it's still a great stat. Thus, for substats, prioritize ER until you have enough, then Crit, then EM. Lastly, let's cover Citlali's potential team comps. Due to the requirements of her A1 passive, Citlali will be a support in teams that can trigger freeze or melt to buff pyro and hydro DPSs. As a shielder, she won't be the highest possible damage support for these teams like Shilonen can be, as part of her value comes from her defensive utility. And when comparing Citlali with other shield options like Zhongli, although her shield will be weaker, she will bring more damage to a team due to her hydro and pyro red shred, damage bonus from 4-piece scroll, and potential to have decent personal damage from her burst nuke. For example, she's a good option for the old school Hu Tao double hydro team over Zhongli. A Neuvillette team can also use Citlali to buff both his and Farina's damage while also introducing freezes. And the standard Arlecchino Vape team can use Citlali for a Vape Melt team, on top of allowing Citlali to melt her burst. In addition, Chaska teams can use Citlali well. Since Chaska can deal both hydro and pyro damage herself depending on the team, she can take advantage of all of Citlali's buffs. Removing hydro and slotting in someone like Mawika can also result in a very strong team just focused on melts. Lastly, Citlali can be used to enable forward melt teams for pyro carries like Arlecchino and Mawika. Unfortunately, her cryo application alone is not enough to allow a pyro DPS to consistently melt, so a second cryo unit is still needed. Despite this, these teams are still strong, and it's nice to have more support for this team archetype, with Citlali providing off-field cryo, buffs to the team, and some damage on her own. And that's everything on Citlali as of now. Overall, Citlali looks like a solid support option for the teams that can utilize her buffs. She provides a small shield for some defensive utility, res shred for pyro and hydro, damage percent from 4-piece scroll, and acts as her own mini rev melt sub DPS when she's able to melt her burst. In many teams, Citlali serves as a Zhongli alternative for pyro and hydro main DPSs that trades a weaker shield for more damage, not only from her own attacks but also from buffs like 4-piece scroll. And in other teams, she's a strong cryo support option for forward melt teams that revolve around pyro main DPSs. But while she definitely has solid places in these niches, there are some parts of her kit that feel a bit underwhelming. First, her shield could definitely be stronger because her defensive utility may feel non-existent. Second, it's a bit confusing as to why Citlali synergizes with freeze. Citlali is an EM scaler, and EM practically does nothing for freeze. Thus, with her initial kit, Citlali is already going to be better in melt comps, so the freeze part isn't really relevant, aside from helping invade melt. Lastly, it does feel unfortunate that Citlali is a cryo character that buffs pyro and hydro, but not cryo, who's in need of buffs. Sure, Citlali indirectly is a buff to cryo since she's a good new cryo support option for teams, but I think it would be nice if they at least changed the hydro res shred to cryo instead to give cryo at least something. This is only the initial beta kit, so there are plenty of weeks to go for some hopefully positive kit updates that make Citlali even better. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Citlali's kit was helpful to y'all. I've already covered covered Mawika and will continue to cover the other new characters and their future beta updates, so if you want to keep tabs, sub to the channel for all the future news and analysis for the patch 5.3 characters. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and like the video if you enjoyed. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.